Hi, welcome to the Nonfiction Book Recommendations Chat. Um, I am so pleased to have people here. I'm so excited about doing this because there's just nothing I love more than recommending good books to people and finding more good books myself. So this is just in that sweet spot. I decided to do this partly as a way of thanking people who supported the Curious Reader's Field Guide to Nonfiction on Kickstarter and my launch team folks. Also because when you write a book about here's how you can be reading nonfiction, that the necessary question people might follow is like, yeah, okay, well, what should I be reading? Give me some good book recommendations. And partly because I did a survey, and the survey had some open-ended questions where people could recommend books. And I have hundreds of books in that data, which are fascinating. And so I want to share some of that with you. So here's what we're going to structure this today. We're going to start with, hang on, book recommendations. I'm going to start with sharing recommendations from the people who completed this nonfiction reading survey. And we'll talk a little bit about who they are and maybe why they're a good group of people to pay attention to their recommendations. And then I'll share with you some of my favorites that I've put on a list of recommended books. And then we'll open it up for discussion and sharing of some of your own favorites. So my hope is you come away with maybe some books to add to your gift list. When people ask you what you want for the holidays, I always give them a list of books, or to give to other people, or new things to add to your to be read pile. So, of course, this comes with the usual disclaimer, which is, books are, of course, a matter of personal taste. I love this little video because I have now a grandson he doesn't chew on his books, he hits them. But still, it's something. It's what he likes to do with his books. So not all the recommendations you see here are going to be up your alley, of course. And I think one of the things that's so interesting is the infinite variety of book recommendations, but it can be really fun to read outside of our usual sweet spots as well. So I'm going to begin with a little bit about the survey of nonfiction readers that I did, which was filled with all sorts of useful insights beyond the book recommendations. So I think I've sent a link. I will send it again if anyone needs it, to some of those survey results. Really, really interesting for nonfiction authors, I think, to take a look at some of those. But let's start with who these people are who are sharing their recommendations. So it's maybe have to help you parse this pie chart. I asked people, how much of your reading is nonfiction? 0 to 20, 20 to 40, in 20% tranches. And so you'll see on if this is a clock on the, about 5:30 to 12, more than half the people here in the orange and green on my side, more than 60% of their reading is nonfiction. So I'm going to say these are really, more than half of these people are really avid nonfiction readers, if more than half of what they read is nonfiction. And, nearly 3/4, it's 40%. So, and up of their reading is nonfiction. So this is not for just dabblers. These are serious readers. More than 1/4 of them read nonfiction book every day. These people. And more than half read nonfiction books or book several times a week. So these are people who are going to nonfiction books with some frequency. Not all of them, obviously. There's a few who are less often, but that's all right too. So this is fun to get recommendations from people who are deeply in the nonfiction reading world. And I also asked them what kind of books they read, and people could choose multiple options. So you'll see it's, and this is probably skewed to my particular connections as well, but a lot of memoir, a lot of self-help, personal development, biography, history, business finance, down near the bottom, psychology. It's really a wonderfully varied mix of things. And most people read across multiple nonfiction genres. I don't think people tend to just say, I only do this in nonfiction. We tend to be maybe curious, exploratory readers. And I asked people, uh, do they want to read more or less nonfiction, or are they happy with what they are doing? And nearly half wanted to read more. So I find that heartening. And if you are in that half, you will get some recommendations here today, I promise you. And I also asked a little bit about what people's motivations were for reading nonfiction, because I think this shows up in the kinds of books that people recommend. Um, the clear winner, and again, people could choose more than one thing, but the clear winner was expanding knowledge. We read because you're curious, we're interested in the world. Sometimes we need to solve problems. Sometimes it's, we just read for entertainment. I love a good real adventure story about polar exploration or something. That's just pure entertainment, but I love them. To keep up in my industry, satisfy job requirements, things like that. But mostly, entertainment and learning is what people are doing this for. So the survey had two open-ended questions. One, asking people if they wanted to share three book recommendations. And most people did, not everybody, but most people did. And second, it asked, has a book ever really changed the way you thought about something, or, had a really impact on you? And if so, do you want to share that book? And so from this survey, I got 269 books that were favorites. And there's some duplicates, which we're going to talk about, and 107 books that people said really changed them. So this is what is in the full list of books. Now uh, I've made the full list available as a PDF. This QR code will take you there, or there's a link. It's on my website, and I think I sent it in the email reminder yesterday as well. But if you can't find it, send me an email and I'll send you the link again. That was so interesting. A lot of people put in a title with no author because, again, I did not structure the survey well for manipulating the data. So that one's on me. So this had titles and no authors. I went and found the authors. If they had title and author, I didn't always check. But I did find, some errors. So they may not all be exactly spelled correctly, or there could be issues because I did not have, that is a lot of time to clean up that much data. So I did what cleanup I could and sorted and looked at it through different lenses, which we'll do a little bit here. So starting with the books that people here recommended to others. So again, there's hundreds of them. So I thought, well, how can what's a meaningful way to dip into this? I thought I'll start by looking at the books that were recommended by more than one person. So they have multiple appearances by different people. All right. And so there's quite a few of these. We have Atomic Habits by James Clear, Deep Work by Cal Newport, Devil in the White City by Eric Larson, Good to Great by Jim Collins, Impossible to Ignore by Carmen Simon, Into Thin Air, John Krakauer. I think it's really interesting how often that book appeared. Killers of the Flower Moon by David Gran, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb, A More Beautiful Question, which is not a book I knew, but it's about asking better questions, which I think, so that went onto my list. Quiet by Susan Cain, which I absolutely love, and Sapien by Yuval Noah Harari. So it's interesting. We have a certain amount of personal development in here, Atomic Habits, Deep Work, probably A More Beautiful Question, and You Should Talk to Someone. We have some sort of history, a little business, Good to Great. It's sort of an interesting mix of these genres. I'm just curious, have you, if you want to put in the chat, have you read a few, most, all, some of those? I'm just curious kind of how many of this half of the doubles people have read. If you want to put that in there, that'd be interesting. You've read 5. Okay. Katrina's read 5 of them. Yep. So I think I suspect that there's a lot of us have read some number of these, just because they're in the air. They're popular. Some of these are very popular books. Karen's read 3. Okay. Interesting. So I've read all but 3, I think, of these, but I think I've been doing a lot of reading. 2. Okay. So let me just say, of these, almost all of them are moi. I would probably recommend I haven't read Impossible to Ignore, so I can't give that a recommendation. Or I haven't read Killers of the Flower Moon, or Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. I've read all but four, okay, or A More Beautiful Question. So I love Quiet. It's a book I've given to many people. It gave me new insights into myself and others. So that's a Susan Cain's book. It's fantastic. Um, and really, anything by Eric Larson is worth a read if you're a history fan. And then, because there was more than would fit on one slide, here's the more recommendations. The Secret by Rhonda Byrne, Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. And you'll notice this is Cal's second book on this recommended list, which I think is fascinating. The Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery, Story by Robert McKee, which I have not read, much to my amazement. I have got to go find that. Team of Rivals, which is a fantastic history about Lincoln by Doris Kearns Goodwin. Tuesdays with Maury, The Undoing Project by Michael Lewis. Why Fish Don't Exist, which has just bumped itself up to near the top of my reading list because it's like part memoir, part science adventure project, part biography. It's like, oh, this is fascinating. I really, really want to read it. Okay, Katrina has read it. Oh, Katrina did not enjoy Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. Okay, I haven't read that one, so I can't really speak to that. Interesting. And that's to the point. Some books that really resonate with people, I mean, this happens to me with bestsellers all the time. I'm like, meh, that's okay. And Word by Word, which I have not read The Secret Life of Dictionaries. Again, I think some of these are going on my Christmas list because I really want to read some of them. So then there were a few people who, instead of putting down book recommendations, just said anything by an author, right? So here are three of the authors, anything by Adam Grant. And, I could probably pretty much recommend that. I really like a lot of his books. Anything by Brene Brown is somebody recommended. And anything by Jane Roberts. Now, is anyone here familiar with Jane Roberts? Okay. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole with this because I'm like, who is this Jane Roberts? She wrote in the early 70s, and her books are all co-authored with Seth, who is a spirit she communicates with through a Ouija board. So I'm like, okay, this is really, really interesting. So I haven't, I might just have to dip into one of those to see what's going on because whoever put this in, put this, anything by her, and then put a bunch of her books in the, it just, one person recommended a lot of Jane Roberts. That was where we're at. So, which is another interesting point. Not every book has a huge audience, but it may have a very small, very intense audience, a very committed one. Three more people, and I have not really read any of these folks' nonfiction. One is Matt Haig, who I know is a very popular fiction writer, but he's also written some nonfiction. I made a note of what they were. Reasons to Stay Alive, The Comfort Book, so those sound really interesting, sort of philosophical. Daniel Handler, who also writes for children under the Lemony Snicket name, but he's written some books that are, even with Lemony Snicket in the title, that are for adults, like And Then What Else, and Horseradish, which is something about bitter truths. And then there's Alfred Korzybski, who wrote about science and semantics in the 20s and 30s. It's like, okay, I don't, so I love that there's some things in here that are recommendations in here that are kind of hidden gems to me. I don't know if they're gems or not, but I mean, I really want to go exploring some of them. Has anyone here read any of these authors? Yeah. You've read Matt Haig. You read his fiction or his nonfiction, Katrina? Both. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I've read the Lemony Snicket children's books. It just never occurred to me he wrote for adults, which is, of course he does. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So those were book recommendations. And again, those I just like cherry picked off some of the ones that came multiple times because I think that's really interesting to see. Then there was a question about books that have really changed your perspective or changed your life. The list on this is smaller because theoretically people only gave one, and that's only if they really felt a book had earned that recognition. But again, it's long enough that there are repeats in here. So let's take a look at some of those books that got repeat appearances by multiple people. One is The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. Has anybody read that? I read that back in the 90s, 80s, right? And it's like, oh, that's so long ago. And then I realized that certain things have gotten ingrained in my brain from that book, like the contributing the emotional bank account or start with the end in mind. And there are things that are just kind of ingrained from that book, which I think is very interesting. Yes, so Katrina's read it multiple times. Uh, yeah, so Karen says she's going to think about including in reviews whether a book has really changed her thinking. I think it's fascinating to know that a book has had that kind of resonance with someone. Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott is a famous writing book. Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. Now, you do have to remember my community people probably tends more heavily to writing than a lot of other groups of nonfiction readers. So, right, The Hero with a Thousand Faces would definitely be of interest to people doing writing. Into Thin Air, which again, fascinating that that showed up here. Loving What Is by Byron Katie and The Secret. Neither of those books have I read. I've heard about The Secret. It's one of the books you see a lot, but I've just never read it. And The Year of Yes. Now, this sounds really interesting by Shonda Rhimes, who's a showrunner for a lot of really well-known shows. And I guess the book is about what happens when she decided to say yes to everything that scared her for a year. Oh, what an interesting book. That might be a fun one to read around, that week between Christmas and New Year's, right as you approach a new year. Katrina's read it. It was a fun and easy read. Yeah, so that's also, I think, going on my list. I think that's interesting. So what's fun here, we have personal development, we have storytelling, writing, we have Into Thin Air, and then we have these things that I think are personal development. So it's sort of a mix that these all resonated such with enough people that they became books that really made a lasting impact on folks. So then I thought, well, what else can how else do I parse and look into this data? Obviously, I could probably have done a lot with it. One of the things I thought is I'll look for those authors who have multiple books because, those of you who write books know it's quite something to write a book that other people are going to recommend, right? To others or that make a lasting impact. But to write a book that affects two people or multiple people that way, and two people in a pretty small sample size, or no, to write two books, more than one book that affect people that way, that's really something. That's something fantastic. So we have here Brene Brown, which is and the books that people cited in this were The Gifts of Imperfection, Braving the Wilderness, and Daring Greatly. We have David Brooks, and the books people cited were How to Know a Person and The Social Animal. Bill Bryson, A Walk in the Woods and a Short History of Nearly Everything, to which I would add my own In a Sunburnt Country because it's hilarious about Australia. I really like that one. Joseph Campbell for The Hero's Journey and The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Adam Grant, who showed up in that Anything by Adam Grant, as well as his book Hidden Potential and his book Essentialism. Doris Kearns Goodwin, who was a phenomenal historian. So for Team of Rivals, which we already saw, and then another book called An Unfinished Love Story, which is a memoir, I think about the loss of her husband. So I think that would be really interesting to read that. Anne Lamott for Bird by Bird and Almost Everything. I have not read Almost Everything. So Emily Nagoski for Burnout and Come As You Are. I've not read anything by Emily Nagoski. Has anyone here read any Emily Nagoski? Yeah, okay. And two Kel Newport books, Slow Productivity and Deep Work, showed up in the recommendations. So that's pretty impressive. Multiple books that really make an impact. Then I thought I'd look through for all the books about writing and or creativity because that's kind of my jam. And there were a lot. Again, I think that's representative of who is in my community, which is a bunch of writers. So I'm just going to share them with you with the proviso that I have not read all of these. Gentle Writing Advice by Chuck Wendig. I haven't read it yet. Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. I have read, which is fun. Bird by Bird, Anne Lamott. Read that. That's lovely. The Creative Act by Rick Rubin, which is really an interesting book. It's sort of an assortment of small little things all scattered through. I Will Judge You by Your Bookshelf, which, should the title have me? Turns out it's a book of cartoons about literature, reading, and writing. So somebody might have to get that for Christmas. I'm Still Writing by Virginia M. Bird, which is a book of excerpts by women writers about writing. Save the Cat writes a novel by Jessica Brody, who I think is a really well known in the fiction and screenwriting area. Steal Like an Artist, Austin Kleon. Story by Robert McKee. Style, Lessons in Clarity and Grace by Joseph Williams and Gregory Colum. And I don't know this book at all, so I'm going off in my journey. Working by Robert Caro. So I have been reading this year The Power Broker along with the 99% Invisible podcast. So you read about 100 pages a month. And now it's like, I have got to read his book about writing. I've got to read his memoir. A couple people mentioned my books because, there are people on my list, so bless them. Thank you. And Writing Beyond Writing by Tim Brooks, which is not one I know as well. So there's lots of interesting things to dig into here, potentially. So those are recommendations from that list. And obviously, you've got the whole list now. I really recommend just go through with the highlighter. It's like, oh, yeah. Oh, I've heard of this. Oh, this looks good. Just play around and see what looks interesting to you because there's a lot of books that are popular and you may have heard of, and I think there's some undiscovered gems. So maybe it'll help your Christmas shopping ideas. I don't know. Then I made a list of a few of my favorites, which I linked to from the Curious Readers Field Guide because I thought I need to at least have some nonfiction recommendations. So here's a QR code where you can find it, but no need. I'm going to just share all these little titles. I really tried to knock it down to like 4 or 5 in a little category and books that I read a while ago that have had a lasting impact. So I'll just zip through these pretty quickly. Big personal development, big idea kind of books. Cal Newport's Slow Productivity, which I loved and I think I will reread. Think Again by Adam Grant because it's about questioning our assumptions. Quiet by Susan Cain, which I've given to a lot of people. And, I gave it to my neighbor up when I was living in Mountain View. And he's just like, this is, I'm giving it to my wife so she understands me, So it was one of those books that just like people really connected with. Quit by Annie Duke, because it's about how we just don't think of, the power of stopping doing things when the opportunities to do other things are better. And 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. I've read this twice. I thought I'd become a yearly read, although he has a new book out, which I've already bought sitting by my chair, on meditations for mortals or something. So I haven't read that yet. That might be my Christmas to New Year's read. I'd like to read something in that time period that sets off the year on a nice start. Then I put a few of my favorite histories here. So for the authors among you, I guess black is required on a history book cover. I didn't notice until I put them all there. They all have black in them and quite a bit of black, which I thought was very funny. But if you read histories, here's a few recommendations. In the Garden of the Beasts by Eric Larson, which everything he writes is really wonderful, and he does a great job of really spinning a story out of really well-researched material. But this one just blew my mind. It's about a ambassador's family living in Berlin in the Hitler pre-World War II. It's crazy. A World Lit Only by Fire just did such a nice job of just immersing you in what it might have been like to live in the Middle Ages. That Manchester writes these really deep biographies of people, but in this one is much more approachable and it's much more, just ordinary person. What was it like? What did you think like? What was your life like? River of Doubt, so much fun, fantastic story about, Teddy Roosevelt, after being the president, just goes on this harebrained expedition down the Amazon and everybody nearly dies. Um, but it's a great story, and Candace Miller tells it really well. Endurance, for those of you who haven't yet read it, or there's many tellings of this story. This is one by Alfred Lansing, who was on the ship with him. Um, just phenomenal. This sort of kicked off my love of polar exploration reading. And Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. As we watch the cabinet being formed now, it's kind of a different situation than than what Lincoln did with his cabinet, but it's really fun to look at those things. Um, yes. Okay. I see there's some books being ordered from the library and from the bookshop. Okay, fantastic. Holiday gift books. Fantastic. I'm so excited. A few current or recent events or journalistic books. There's been so many, but these are some of the ones that really made an impact. Bad Blood, the story of Theranos. If you haven't read that yet, it's a page turner. The Smartest Guys in the Room, that gets back to the Enron story, but it was fascinating. And really almost anything about the financial world from Michael Lewis, but The Big Short was a really, really interesting one that he wrote. So I enjoy those. Science and social science kinds of books. These are a few of the ones that I really enjoy, or like I said, really made an impact on me. This one on the breath, if you haven't looked at it, I found it just fascinating. Now I'm a singer, also, so breathing has always been something I've thought about more than, I don't know, some people might. But this James Nestor does a deep dive, and I've instituted new breathing patterns in my life and things because of this book. So, Invisible Women is about data bias against women in the world, and it's a really, really interesting read by Caroline Criado Perez. Thinking Fast and Slow, I read many years ago when it came out, and it really kind of started me down the rabbit hole of cognitive science and what was going on with that. The Confidence Game, really interesting. Maria Konnikova, about uh, con artists and how that works and how they work and why we fall for them. Um, and Atul Gawande, which I don't really know where this book belongs categorically, but it's something probably we all should read. It's a lovely book about medicine and what matters at the end of life. And we all, at some point or other in our life, have to look at those issues, both for other people and for ourselves. So, um, and then I'm trying to read a lot more books about nature and the environment. Here's a few that have really kind of made an impact. One is The Death and Life of the Great Lakes. So I grew up in the Midwest, and I had no idea all of this stuff was going on in Lake Michigan and things. Really interesting. Dan Egan does a fantastic job of really telling stories. His newer book is about phosphorus, and I love it. So it's like he's a great, great journalistic writer about what's happening in the environment, and always interesting. Braiding Sweetgrass. Has everybody here read that? Yeah, lovely. Intertwining, indigenous knowledge and botany. She's a botanist and a poet and an indigenous person, and all of those threads intertwine. And it's a lovely way to kind of look at the world and see different layers of meaning as you look at the world. It's a beautiful piece. Comfort of Crows, which I read more recently. There's a young reader version of Braiding Sweetgrass. That is fascinating. Okay. Thank you, Katrina. The Comfort of Crows. What I liked about this and what it changed me about, well, first of all, in reading it, I basically just I just had to slow down and just sit. She wrote one essay a week through the year. And they're lovely. She's a sort of backyard backyard year, she calls it, backyard birder, what's nature just around me. And it made me think about living in a way in which you're looking that closely and really living that closely in the world around you. And um, so it's like, oh, I'm really tempted to try to do that next year, except I think I could probably manage only one essay a month, but it might be fun. So, and A World on the Wing is like some of the newer things we've learned about bird migration, which was just mind-blowing stuff. Really interesting. And then language and reading and writing. This is just a few of my favorites. It's hard to even know where to recommend, but I always often recommend Reader Come Home, which is about what's happening with our brains with digital devices and reading and how we need to protect the deep reading. Um, For those of you who are authors, so much fun to read John Steinbeck's journals while he was writing The Grapes of Wrath, because it's like, oh, I'm hungover today. I couldn't start writing till 11. It's just such a useful reminder about how even the greats have all just sort of the life, how they get around it, how they keep going through all of the exigencies that life throws at them. The War of Art, this is Stephen Pressfield. That's a classic about getting past resistance. And this is the last one, says who I just read. So it's not an older book, but if you have any word nerds on or grammar nerds on your email, on your gift list, or if you are one yourself, this is just such a delightful book. So much fun about usage. And really, she's very chill about a lot of usage issues. She teaches linguistics. So, okay. So we've gone through the survey recommendations, and we've gone through some of my personal recommendations. So what I'd like to do is open up discussion on, what books would you recommend, and what will you add to your list based on our conversation today?